Welcome to AW360 Live at Advertising Week New York. I'm BJ Smith. I'm joined by Mike Romoff, who is the head of global and channel sales at LinkedIn. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So, what's going on at LinkedIn these days?
Well, a lot of excitement on the advertising front, a lot of excitement on LinkedIn in general, but as part of Microsoft, that's some big news.
Yes.
It's actually been a great experience for us at the company. I think there's a ton of potential, and there's just a lot of conversation around what are all the things that we can actually do together. And so, not a lot being announced this time around, but I think everyone's got a lot of ideas about what the opportunities are.
It's interesting that that you're part of Microsoft now. A friend of mine who we had on the stage earlier in the week, Jeffrey Cologne, who is works for Microsoft Bing. Mm-hmm. He's been around for years talking about it, and he's definitely a LinkedIn influencer. He has, I think he said, well over 100,000 followers on LinkedIn. So it's kind of interesting to see all those companies come together like that.
Yeah, there's a lot of obvious business overlap, but I think the thing that struck me and a lot of the folks internally is how great of a cultural fit it's been.
Yeah.
The missions of the companies, the way that we're trying to really empower people, empower companies to do things, you can't make that up. And so it's been really nice to see how well those things align, and it's made a lot of the conversations that much easier.
All right. So we're at Advertising Week. We need to talk advertising.
Let's talk about advertising.
So, how does advertising create real value for companies?
Yeah. So, people who have been, all through Ad Week, you go to all the panels, you hear everyone talking about all the buzzwords, and we get so caught up in all of the capabilities, the new shiny objects. In some ways, you forget about what the point is of being a marketer.
Right.
And marketing and advertising becomes its own end, kind of in and of itself.
Right.
And really, an advertising investment, a marketing investment, is an investment in your company to spur growth, to acquire customers, to move the needle in some strategic dimension that you're trying to achieve as a company. And I think the advertising industry, especially with digital, made us so obsessed on the things that were easy to measure. Clicks and click-through rates and leads, and we talk about funnels and all that kind of stuff, but the reality is we manage to what we measure, and more often than not the things that we measure don't have that much relationship with the things that the company's actually trying to do.
It's interesting that I've spent a lot of my career around developers, mm-hmm. and it's always great when I see a developer get excited and say, hey, look what we can do now. We just figured out how to do this thing, right? And the marketer in me is like, okay, how can I use that new thing mm-hmm. that we now can do? But as you're saying, it's great to have the technology, but it's got to be useful, right?
I think you can't forget the context of why, what's the big picture? Why are we doing this? It's not just because I have a budget and I've got to spend it by the end of the quarter.
Yeah.
I'm trying to really break into a new market, or I'm trying to expand my business in a certain direction. And I think that's a big opportunity for the industry in general to connect back to the real economic value that advertising can provide for companies, for the economy overall, and recycled traffic that's getting pushed all around the internet in order to see ads that drive more recycled traffic, not really creating a lot of economic value. And so if we can really understand how does advertising influence productivity, investment, growth, I think that's where things are going. You see it with the marketing clouds trying to tie together the front end and the sales teams with the back end and customer and CRM. Mm-hmm. And so to really say, hey, it's great that we converted this customer, are they actually a good customer? And I think with a very few exceptions, most organizations can't really answer those kinds of questions very well.
Right. One of the things that has popped up several times as an example is the automotive industry and connecting that online marketing experience to an offline purchase, right? Mm-hmm. And the thing that always pops in my head, because it's so relevant right now, is last year, so it's been over a year now, we purchased a Honda for my wife.
Okay. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's good. It's a good car. And I did a lot of research, and that's I think that's where the problem comes in is that I did the research.
Yeah.
She bought the car because I'm so happy with my old Volkswagen, but which is not a diesel, so it's good. But since I did the research, I was the one online. I'm the one who's being targeted by ads.
Yeah.
And I probably shouldn't have mentioned the brand name, but I'm continuing to get targeted by the ads. We bought the car over a year ago, right? And it's still something that happens. And we'll talk about the relevance of it. You know, tying those pieces all together. Now, if she was the one doing the research and bought the car, then it would have been perfect.
Yeah.
But I think that there's another step of understanding needs to happen. That in this case, I was the expert in the relationship. She was the buyer.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you're also touching on a user experience issue, right? Where you're at one point in your journey and your purchase decision, a lot of those things, those ads and those messages would have been pretty welcome because, yes, I am looking to buy something. And you're talking about a car, which is a big personal type expenditure.
Right.
If you're talking about the B2B world, which LinkedIn is, squarely in, those are multi-million-dollar purchases that there's a ton of research for. And so when you're in that mode to receive all those messages, those ads are actually great and super relevant. The minute you make that purchase, you're totally annoyed by them, and they have zero relevance to you. And the understanding of not just where you are in the cycle, but how you're interacting with those messages. If they knew that you bought a car and then instead the messages were like, hey, you bought a car, you should feel really great. Or here's a user group that you can join. And we see it all the time in the B2B world. You make a big purchase, as soon as you make it, you want someone to come and tell you did a great job by making that decision. Yeah. And if you can tap into that in a really scalable way, you're using that to your advantage. And I think more often than not, it's your experience, which is, it's good enough that I know you have some interest. At some point, you demonstrated some intent, and I'm just going to pound you with it because that's the only signal I have. Right. And obviously, that's not particularly effective.
Yeah. Native advertising has been mainstream for a while. How do you think it's evolved over the years?
Yeah, native, it's one of those categories that becomes a buzzword, and then anything that you want to make sound cool becomes native, right? Yeah. So if you take just a banner ad and you put it embedded in the page, all of a sudden it's a native ad. No. And I think the best native advertising truly is native. It's a non-interruptive experience. It's something that is truly integrated into what you're trying to do when you're visiting a page or in an app or in some environment versus something that's still trying to catch your attention away from the thing that you're doing. And when you think about the best native advertising, there's a relevance to what you're doing versus it being something that needs to catch your attention and be extreme and be provocative in order to take you away from something. And so the idea of native advertising is not even new. There were advertorial and sponsored television and radio shows. I mean, it's been around for a really long time. What I think has really transformed it, the notion of a feed as a main way of consuming content in apps and on sites, has enabled the ability to provide really relevant advertiser messaging in an environment where people are in a kind of lean forward and receptive state for it. Right. And so I think that's what we do. Facebook, a lot of the platforms that have feeds, it lets an advertiser participate almost the way a friend would, to recommend something that's interesting to you, to tell you something you didn't already know. It's also less about selling, and I think that's actually a really key piece, is advertising a lot of the times is about selling, and just buy this, buy that, and it has to work, but it has to work in conjunction with broader messaging.
I think that's a trap we often fall into, and as you were saying it, I was thinking back, it's been around for a while, I was thinking back to the days that I regularly subscribed to car magazines. Mm-hmm. And as I would flip through the magazine, reading the articles, then I would come across one that I think is an article, and it turns out that it's an ad, right? Yeah. And more often than not, that would frustrate me. Mm-hmm. And because began to read like an article, but
Yeah.
it clearly was an ad that somebody was
Yeah.
trying to sell me something
Yeah.
instead of teach me something or help me enjoy something,
Yeah.
right? One of the concerns that I have right now with all that's going on in in America, especially with politics and whatnot,
Yeah.
and the fake news going around.
Yeah.
It used to be that native advertisement could be something that would appear, and as you're reading it, there would be key things in there that they're trying to tell you is important because
Yeah.
their brand does that well.
Yeah.
You know, are we at a point now where people are questioning the authenticity of that kind of a message?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. And I think in some ways they're not questioning it enough. You know,
Right.
part of the issues we've had are that people will take something at face value when it has the trappings of having authority.
Right.
And we have been trained maybe not to be as skeptical as we should be
Right.
on some of those things. But to answer your question, the advertiser and the message that they're delivering needs to be authentic. And if it's manipulative, right, if it's drawing you in with something that seems objective and then taking a left turn, you know, to really try to push you in a direction, the association you have with that is the feeling of being manipulated and mistrustful. And you know, I know you've talked to a lot of folks about trust, you know, in some of the sessions that
LinkedIn
you've
Trust
done.
series, yes.
We talk a lot about trust at LinkedIn. The trust that you as a consumer or as a business professional have with an advertiser, that's based on them being upfront with you about what's going on here. So I have no problem with, I was a big magazine guy, you know,
Right.
and I loved reading magazines, and sometimes I was a stereo guy. And sometimes the ads for the newest amp and, you know, Macintosh, whatever, like, those were just as interesting, if not more interesting, than the articles.
Right.
And they were objective, they were factual, they were telling you things that you wanted to know, but it was upfront, you know. And so I knew, okay, maybe it was a little bit embellished because they're putting it in a positive spin. But if it's done correctly, it's a really positive experience. It helps educate. It helps give you a good feeling about the brand. Where it starts to go awry is when there's a ulterior motive. There's something that's
There's always an ulterior motive to some extent.
You know, I think the motivation can be upfront, right? You can say, hey, I'm going to try to sell you something because I think it's actually going to be a really good thing for you, right? I'm going to help solve a problem you have. You're going to pay me money for it, but at the end of the day, you're going to be happy. I'm going to be happy. That's a very upfront exchange of value.
Yeah.
Now, saying that, hey, I'm going to sit here and just talk to you, and you know, there's nothing going on, but in the meantime, look over here. I'm going to take some money out of your pocket. You know, that's a much more manipulative circumstance. And so you see that. I mean, a lot of the things that happen with, you know, fake news and just, you know, redirecting people away from what they thought they were doing to another environment. You know, that's where I think there are real problems. And things like disclosure and, you know, making it apparent that you're looking at an ad, I think those certainly help. I mean, there's a reason why those have been legal restrictions and rules that we've had either self-imposed or imposed by the government for a long time. You know, there needs to be an even playing field for people to understand what's happening. But I think beyond that, as an advertising industry, we have to think about how are we actually putting ourselves forward in relation to what we present to the public.
Right.
You know, yes, I can say this is an ad in gray font, as small as legally permissible, so that, you know, I get away with it. But why can't we be upfront? If I'm really presenting something of value and there's an honest value exchange, I don't need to hide that.
Right.
And I think the marketers that do a really good job and the platforms that facilitate them being able to do a good job, they're really upfront. And they're saying, you know what, I'm going to give you this infographic about something you care about. And yes, it's self-serving because it's from my brand, but I'm not really trying to sell you anything. I just want to educate you. And after the 10th time of me educating you, and now you feel like you've got, you know, a good handle on the decision, then I'm going to talk to you about how to think about buying from me or how to, you know, choose a solution that may work for you. That's really marketing in a, you know, in its best sense. And I think native, you know, it's such a broad spectrum from all this virtuous good stuff that I like, you know, to trying to catch your eye with botched celebrity plastic surgeries and slideshows. And by the way, those are marketed as native advertising as well.
It's clickbait.
It's clickbait because it has to be. There's no other real value there, and so recycling people all around the web by having more and more provocative, pictures and headlines. It's not really creating anything of real value.
Yeah, yeah. So I love to trail run, and as I'm thinking about this, I'm picturing how some of this could work and be authentic. So if there's a shoe brand that wants to talk about trail running in Iceland, for example, which I'd love to do one day, if I saw this ad, but it was telling me about the trails, it's telling me about the places to stay. It's giving me like some insider track, then that's useful information that I can use. But if somewhere along the way it says, and oh, by the way, we have this rock plate technology that will keep your feet from getting banged up, that may almost ruin the experience. So do you do something like that, or do you wait till the end? You say, look, if you want to know more about our products, or do you just give them the article, here's the helpful piece of information, and then later on we'll come back around and talk about the products?
I don't know that there's a one size fits all for every marketer.
That's a trick question.
I think it's about your expectation. I think it's in that scenario you had an expectation about something that was going to be more factual and objective, and then they went into some selling language that maybe didn't feel quite right.
Yeah.
But when you think about what brands are trying to do, no one's brand promise is, let me sell you some shoes. It's about reaching peak performance, or it's about, for trail running, it's about taking in something new in the outdoors that you haven't experienced. It's something that's aspirational.
Yeah.
And can you leave someone with that experience? And if they buy into it and it's authentic, you probably don't mind being sold to and saying, hey, you know what, I like what you're talking about. How can I get a little piece of that? Okay, it's by buying these shoes, and maybe I'm not going to go to Iceland and run in that trail, but I can feel that same kind of feeling in my own backyard because I have a piece of the brand. That's, if they're really doing it well, again, there's that kind of honest value exchange. It's different than reading something where you think it's a real article and you're like, why are all these embedded links that take me off to discount shoe emporium to do something? And
exactly.
And we're in the industry, and so we've got an eye for things that look a little bit off. But for the internet is ubiquitous. Everybody uses it at every level of sophistication, and there are many people who just see that and don't differentiate between what's authentic and what really is manipulative.
Right.
And that's where I think we get into trouble with the ethics and with sort of the rules that need to be put in place.
Well, before I let you go, real quick, I'm curious what you think is the future of this native advertising.
I think that the future of native is around scale.
Okay.
Right now, you ask 10 different people what native is, and they'll give you 10 different answers. Sites do it differently, apps do it differently, and in order for a marketing ecosystem, an advertising ecosystem to scale, there has to be some standards, there has to be a way of buying in a bigger kind of way, and I think we're starting to see the beginnings of that. It's a harder problem. A banner ad, you make an ad, and it's this size, and it can fit in this slot on the screen. Native is very different, and so you need to have a collection of different assets, you need to have different options, and it's just a type of creative canvas that we're still figuring out. So I think once those standards come into play, once there's some standardization around how you can buy and how you can integrate those kinds of ads, that's going to unlock a lot of scale and a lot of demand as that friction kind of comes out of the system.
Great. Mike, thank you for joining me today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll be back with more AW360 Live at Advertising Week New York.